Have you ever noticed that the people we call experts don't seem to carry the same authority they once did? It is not that expertise has disappeared. If anything, there's more of it than ever before. But in a world overflowing with information and full of people living in segregated networks with very different perspectives, what we usually call expertise isn't enough. People need something more. They need synthesis, context, relevance. And that is pretty subjective. And when traditional experts don't provide that synthesis, people look elsewhere. They spend hours watching YouTube deep dives, scrolling Reddit threads, listening to long form podcasts. They are not necessarily rejecting expertise. They are looking for someone who can connect the dots in a way that actually fits their reality. In this video, I want to ask why the kind of expertise people actually need often is not the kind of expertise they get. Why scientists and professors like me struggle to meet this demand. And what that says about how we navigate knowledge today. Because this is not just about expertise, it's about how we decide what is true. It's about which voices we trust. It's about how we make sense of a world that is overflowing with information. Think about any time you try to learn something new. Did that thing you were learning turn out to be as simple as you were thinking it would be? Of course not. The more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to learn. What might have looked simple starts splitting into layers of nuance you didn't even know existed. Take something basic like eating healthier. At first, it seems simple. More vegetables, less junk food, maybe drink more water. That's where most of us begin. But the moment you start zooming in, a whole new level of detail emerges. Now we are talking about macros, micronutrients, gut health, timing of the meals, the glycemic index, inflammation. That's not bad. That's what happens when knowledge grows. But it also means expertise keeps slicing itself thinner and thinner. Every closer look gives us more nuance, but it also makes us zoom in. The scope gets narrower. This has always been true. But today, the speed is different. Knowledge is exploding. But human bandwidth is not growing at the same rate to cope with this explosion. There is just so much we can hold in our brains. That's why the realm of expertise of any single expert is shrinking. Now, this shrinking scope of expertise creates a new kind of challenge. The issue here is that real-life decisions are not about mastering one narrow slice of knowledge. Real-life decisions are about putting the pieces together, and that requires something that fragmented expertise alone cannot give us. It requires synthesis. And my synthesis is different than yours. Let's say you are 40 years old. You have a stressful job. You want to eat healthier. Where do you even start? That's not a question for just one kind of expert, right? You need input from nutrition, from psychology, from stress research, from habit formation, and probably more. And in this case, there's one more expert, one we almost never talk about, yourself. You're the only one who knows your own life, your schedule, your non-negotiables. That personal knowledge, being an expert on your own reality, is a crucial part of any good decision. So any real synthesis is going to be always subjective. Now, I want to be clear here about what I mean when I say that all synthesis is subjective, as this could be misunderstood to mean something like anything goes. When people say things like, we all live in different realities, or that is just my truth, they are not usually suggesting that there is a plurality of ontology. They don't literally mean the reality is different for each person. They probably mean that some aspects of reality are more relevant than others, depending on the person. For instance, let's say we both agree that aspirin helps with my headache, but it does not help with your headache. These two facts are part of reality, but I'm certainly more interested in one of them, and you are certainly more interested in the other. If we both had a headache, I would take an aspirin and you would not. But we both could agree with these two different aspects of reality. If you needed to give me advice about whether I should take an aspirin, you would tell me to take the aspirin, right? So our understanding of reality could still be objective, but we would pay attention to different aspects of reality when making decisions. Even if we had the perfect study from every relevant field, we would still have to choose what matters most to us. Short-term results or long-term health? What risks feel worth it? What trade-offs actually fit our life? Those are not objective questions. Those are personal. Those are situational. Those depend on our values, our temperament, our context. A good study might be able to tell us what works on average, but it cannot tell us what works for us. So even the most evidence-based synthesis will always need human judgment. our judgment, and the judgment of anyone helping us make sense of it all. And that is the kind of expertise we almost never talk about. The expertise of putting things together into something that actually works in real life for us. Take medical decisions, for instance. When I have to make a medical decision, sometimes I consider looking directly at scientific papers. Of course, this is not for everyone. One has to have some scientific training to get any value from reading these papers. But when I do that, I'm often surprised about the limited value I get from looking at these papers. They feel removed from my actual life. They talk about the average patient, but I don't know how much that applies to me. And I know things those papers don't. What I'm willing to risk, what I'm able to stick to, what I've already tried. In theory, that's what the doctor is there for, to combine the evidence, their experience with other people, and my reality. And the best doctors try. They've seen how treatments play out in real lives, but even then, they only see one slice of my life. They don't see my habits. They don't see my stress. They don't know if I'll actually follow through. And if we have this limitation even in medicine, where at least doing a synthesis is part of the job, just imagine all the other areas of life where no one is even being paid to do a synthesis. Take education for our kids, for instance. If I want to choose among different learning methods, different philosophies, depending on the personality of my kids, who helps me with that? Teachers are trained to teach, not to guide us through competing theories, not to weight what is best for each specific child. And they work inside a system, a school, with its own structure, its own incentives. Some teachers might actually understand how to adapt to the context of our own child, but logistics often make it impossible for them to actually do that in practice in a classroom, since there are so many students for each teacher. Or take career decisions. If you are switching industries or balancing income with life purpose, or trying to match your work to your personality, who pulls together the information from psychology, economics, coaching, lived experience? Most of us are left to figure this out alone. So, if all synthesis is subjective, what actually makes a good synthesis? A good synthesis isn't just about accuracy, it's about relevance. And relevance is not one size fits all. There are two key dimensions here. First, people have different contexts, different circumstances, like in the aspirin example from before. But this shows up not only in which kind of facts we tend to pay attention to. For instance, another implication of this is that people might want different levels of depth. Some people satisfies. They just want enough information to feel comfortable and make their decisions. Others optimize. They want to go over every angle, every layer of research before they decide. Of course, neither approach is always better. It depends on the person, the stakes, and the cost in time and energy. For instance, someone who followed generic advice before and had a good experience might be comfortable satisficing today. But someone who's been burned by generic advice before, or someone who already knows they are far from average, is going to lean towards optimizing. And that makes sense. I've seen that in my own life, actually. I'm more of a satisficer, and my wife tends to be an optimizer. For a while, I thought she was overcomplicating things, spending way too much time researching, trying to get everything just right. I thought that she was doing a kind of paralysis by analysis. But eventually I realized that what works fine for me, what I find on page 1 from Google and call good enough, almost never works for her. She's more punished than I am when she follows generic advice. So for her, doing deep research might not be a preference, it's probably more like a necessity. And synthesis is subjective not only because people have different contexts. People also make sense of things differently. Some people rely mostly on studies, statistics, and formal research. Others put more weight on personal experience, intuition, or community wisdom. I'm speaking about plurality of epistemics. Different ways of knowing, different standards for what makes sense, different pathways for understanding. Again, I'm not talking about plurality of ontology. I'm not speaking about different realities at all. I'm talking about different ways of understanding the same reality. And how a synthesis is expressed completely changes how it's understood. The exact same insight can come across as logical and detached in one version, personal and urgent in another, or casual and funny in another. That difference is not just decoration, it is part of how the idea actually spreads and sticks. In a previous video, I called that an idea package, a combination of content, tone, delivery, emotional framing, and whatever else gets embedded when we express an idea. Depending on the package, the very same idea can feel either distant or deeply resonant. And in a world where expertise is scattered and decisions are personal, that difference matters a lot. That is why the best expert for you might not be the one with the most credentials. It might be the one who explains things in a way that actually fits your life, in a way that can land for you. So now that we can see this massive demand for synthesis, with all its subjectivity, all its plurality, who is actually fulfilling this demand? Not the usual suspects, not the people from science and academia, not professors like me. It is hard for us to do that for a few reasons, actually. A key reason is the way people in academia communicate with each other. Because our careers depend on publishing research, and publishing means going through peer review, our first priority is meeting the standards of other academics, not the broader public. That might make sense if the goal is advancing research inside a field, but it also creates a blind spot because the academic system systematically overvalues objectivity and impersonality and undervalues the subjective and plural forms of synthesis that people actually need. And that is not the only issue. We also tend to focus on what can be measured, not necessarily on what is important. We frame problems in ways that allow for clean, definitive conclusions, even when the real problems don't have clean, definitive answers. They require messy thinking, tentative reasoning, cross-disciplinary connections, different forms of knowing that don't always fit neatly into academic methods. And then there's language. Each field has its own shared vocabulary, its own way of thinking, its own assumptions. That makes it hard for outsiders to distill the main insights from each field, and even harder for someone to synthesize across different fields, each with their own language, each with their own framework. And as if that wasn't enough, there's another issue, a bigger one. Academics are not a representative sample of society, right? Certain backgrounds, certain perspectives, certain ways of thinking are underrepresented. And that shapes not just how we communicate, but which questions we even ask, which blind spots we never catch, which possibilities never even show up. There's a built-in bias in the kinds of problems that get studied, the frameworks we use to approach them, and the solutions we consider viable. Of course, there's a lot more to say about this. If you're interested, let me know. I'm happy to delve deeper into this in another video. But for now, let me just say that this is exactly why my wife and I started making these videos. We felt like it would be too costly or maybe just impossible for us to say several of the things we wanted to say through the standard academic process. And I bet that's also why more and more people in academia are turning to platforms like YouTube. Let me be clear about something. Maybe the academic norms I just discussed exist for a reason. For all its flaws, science and academia still have a pretty decent error correction system. A system that over time tends to discard bad ideas and elevate good ones. Of course, it is a slow error correction system, sometimes painfully slow, but generally it is a good one. The success of science is obvious, right? Still, I can't help but wonder, could we perhaps build an even better error correction system, one that engages with plurality of perspectives in a meaningful way? I'll try to explore this possibility in future videos. In any case, thankfully, science and academia are not the only places where new knowledge and real expertise emerge. You can find new ideas in many places, like in all forms of art, in everyday conversations, or across the wide range of content people now share online. Especially online, where the ability to speak without gatekeepers has exploded in recent years. Platforms like Reddit and YouTube are not considered scientific. They are not objective, but maybe that is the point. They are useful precisely because they embrace subjectivity. They combine facts with stories, data with values, evidence with trade-offs, and they help people decide, not in general, but in their own lives. And what makes them powerful is not just the content, it's the context. We get personal details, we get tone, we get rhythm and emphasis and delivery, and all of that helps us see whether the person giving advice is someone you should pay attention to, whether their situation overlaps with ours in some meaningful way. And that is how we usually decide what to trust. That's how we choose which voices to follow. Now, of course, there's a risk here. The same platforms that can help us find better fits can also send us in the wrong direction. They can amplify misinformation, they can pull us toward extreme viewpoints. Again, I'll return to that in future videos, especially on how we can engage with plurality of perspectives without falling into the trap of thinking that anything goes. Before I end this video, let me just give you a big picture of where I'm trying to go in future videos. If you think about it, this video is really about how traditional systems of knowledge like academia are built around epistemic gatekeeping. They are designed to filter knowledge through narrow standards of objectivity and rigor. And there is real value in that. That's what gives us confidence that we are not just making things up, that something is grounded, it's real. But that process also misses a lot of aspects of the truth. It doesn't always tap into the kinds of knowledge that are personal, contextual, or hard to encode. And it also does not embrace epistemic plurality, since academics like me are not quite representative of all possible legitimate ways to know and understand things that are real. In future videos, I want to explore this trade-off more directly, because the more we want shared standards and common ground, the more we tend to miss certain kinds of truths.